Hello and welcome to another Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra tidbits or titbits, depending on, whatever you like. Uh, and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we start? Well, I've got so much to talk about as ever. I'm probably going to split this into two videos, so expect two extra today. You don't have to watch them. Don't complain if there's too much, too long, too much of me talking, whatever. And I'm not forcing you to listen. But if you want it, here it is for you. I'm going to start with reference to Ukraine, the latest podcast, which is produced by The Telegraph. If you don't listen to this on a daily basis, you should. It is a superb source of information about what's going on. It is from a UK point of view, but actually they recognise that a lot of their readership or listenership, sorry, is from around the world, and so therefore it caters for that as well. So it isn't really just a UK centric um, view on the goings on in Ukraine. What I'm going to play you now is their assessment, having talked to a Western. You'll hear Dom Nichols here talk about this. He's basically got some information about the losses that Russia and Ukraine have taken and comparing those two losses. This is one of the areas that there is always a lot of talk about. When I give you the Ukrainian loss stats on a daily basis for the Russian losses, there's always pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin voices shouting back saying, "Oh, that's propaganda, it's inaccurate, whatever." You could argue but this is from Western intelligence. Let's see what they have to say.
That was very interesting. I also just want to bring up to speed with a couple of things. I was in a brief yesterday with a Western official, as we said before, senior person or persons in the defence and security establishment, but I won't divulge who, where, or well, I told you the when. It was yesterday, but just a few bits and pieces from that I think were particularly interested. Casualties we've spoken about as we can, when we can. It's very unclear about numbers on either side, and it is important. It's not just sort of ghoulish speculation. Of course, it is important to understand what the reality is on the ground. So, what we think, this came from a Western official, and they've suggested that Russia is suffering about 1,000 casualties a day. Now, the recent figures we were surprised.
I'm going to interrupt here. So this is interesting because it says 1,000 casualties a day, but that number, as he'll just go on to say, includes injured, captured, missing. So it's not just death. So when the Ukrainians produce 1,000 a day at the moment, or maybe six, when it's 690 and then 700 today was near 1,000, that's liquidated personnel. There's this constant argument as to whether, or discussion as to whether that is dead or whether liquidated includes injured as well. But they're basically saying, broadly speaking, there's 1,000 casualties a day, which is 1,000 people taken out of being able to fight. So you could argue that when that comes to, you make your own conclusions. I'll let him continue.
A couple of weeks ago, when the figures of sort of 800 a day were being produced, so that is just incredible, and had to sort of check it. And yes, that was the number being put out by Ukraine and then elsewhere. So Western official yesterday told me about 1,000 casualties a day. That's killed, wounded, missing, and taken prisoner. But 1,000 people off the battlefield. That is an enormous amount, an enormous number of people. Now, on the Ukrainian side, the official said Ukrainian casualties were, quote, on a level that would be unsustainable for many countries, unquote, and a figure of at least 100,000. Again, dead, wounded, missing, captured. A huge number, but the about half what we think Russia has suffered. But
so that's a huge statement. So and there'll be a talk about half the number that Russia suffered, but of that number, are there more dead than wounded? The idea is that Ukraine's stats are about half of Russian stats.
More importantly than that, I think the dead to wounded ratio is significantly lower for Ukraine than Russia. Now, if you're defending, you generally take fewer casualties than if you're attacking. Attacking is a very risky business, and defensive positions can be extremely hard to crack. So the defender generally has fewer casualties.
Right, and then he goes on to make a bit of a mess of talking about the stats. So then his fellow presenter or reporter takes over and sort of adds in, puts some flesh on the bones there. So let's listen to him.
Can just add in on what Don was talking about there. My understanding is that yeah, the Ukrainian figures are around 100,000 casualties, but with a kind of mortality ratio of between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20, which means that only between 1 in um, only between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 of those people are actually dying. So I think if you extrapolate that out over 100,000, that would mean a total death rate of possibly about between 5 and 10,000, which is a lot less than the Russian ratio, which is closer to 3 to 1, and also a lot less than some of the figures we've otherwise seen bandied around for Ukrainian total deaths, which in some cases have people have been speculating that it may be roughly comparable to what the levels that the Russians have suffered, which, according to some estimates, are anything up to about 60,000 or so.
So if we were to look at the totality of what's been said there, it's like the Russians are suffering twice as many Ukrainians. Ukrainians got 100,000 casualties, of which the killed to wounded ratio is perhaps 20 or somewhere between 10 and 15, sorry, to 1, which means that there's going to be somewhere between, I don't know, 5 and 15,000 maybe dead. Now that's on the very low stats, it seems, for Ukrainians. So I would estimate there would be more than that. But it also means that for the Russians, with 200,000 casualties, that would make 50,000. So a 3 to 1 ratio or 1 to 3 ratio. There's 1 dead to 3 wounded, which means 50,000 and 150,000 wounded, 50,000 dead. So 50,000 would be at least 3 times as many dead as the Ukrainians. But then there's lots of vagueness in there and lots of elbow room. I, when people sort of push me for the statistics, I would just go as far as to say there are a lot more Russian dead and wounded than Ukrainian dead and wounded, but there's a lot on both sides. And that's as far as I would be happy to go, because I think putting a number on these things is really difficult and just opens you up to being proved to be wrong. Like, what do I know? How do I know how exactly they calculate them? But I think when you look at the material that's been lost, and when you look at all these other bits of information, then it would make sense the Russian losing more. Like, for example, that they're attacking more than they're defending, and the video evidence and this and that. You put all of the whole jigsaw together, and Russia, I'm sure, are losing. If Western intelligence is saying twice as many as Ukrainians, then I would say that's pretty plausible. But then, what number is that, and how many of those are actually dead, and how many are wounded? They are saying 3 to 1 for the Russians, 15 to 1, 10 to 1 for the Ukrainians. So, somewhere around those figures we've been talking about might be plausible, but I think that's probably being a little bit generous to the Ukrainians there. Nonetheless, still a lot of people taken out of action for the Ukrainians. Right, let's move on to the GLSDB, which is a ground launched small diameter bomb. Just to let you know what that is, I think there's going to be a lot of people talking about this because it looks like this might be what has been used in Mariupol and might be used to a greater effect on the battlefield or across the front lines in Ukraine. So the GLSDB uses the Lockheed Martin M26 MLRS rocket section with a Boeing GBU-39B small diameter bomb. So a bomb is something you drop and it just falls down where you drop it. If you're moving along quickly in one direction, that bomb will have not just a perpendicular trajectory straight down, vertically down. It will have a trajectory that is using the movement of the airplane as well, so it goes slightly further forward, but it's still going to effectively drop. It might go, slightly diagonally. So there's lots of these bombs hanging around. What can we do with these bombs, and can we turn them into a rocket so that actually these bombs will go where we want them to go from where we send them off from the ground, rather than going roundabout where we think they're going to go by dropping them from the air and calculating the speed of the aircraft and physics and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so Thomas Tyner says the M26 was the original rocket used with the M270 to deliver, so that's a multiple launch rocket system, to deliver cluster munitions. M26 rockets are being dismantled, which means lots of M26 rocket sections are available. It's recycling, right? Whenever you have any industry that has stuff that you're going to throw away, you want to be able to make money out of that. You want to be able to use that, otherwise it's just complete waste. So here is, right, we've got loads of rocket sections. What do we do with them? Which means a lot of N26 rocket sections are available. N26 rockets come in pods of 6. Pods are filled with rockets at Lockheed Martin's plant in Arkansas. The GBU-39B small diameter bomb is made by Boeing. It is an INS GPS guided glide bomb. Each BRU, so actually this bomb, rather than just dropping straight down, it does do some gliding. Each BRU 61A bomb rack unit contains 4 GBU-39B or GBU-39AB or GBU-39BB. Almost all NATO fighters and bombers can deploy the GBU-39B. So that's really important. This bomb, glide bomb, can be fitted to pretty much all NATO fighters. Once released, the bombs deploy wings and glide to their target. Glide means the bombs are slow when compared to missiles. A bit like JDAM. So this is the idea of JDAMs. You have these bombs that have fins that come out and they glide and have much greater range than just a bomb that kind of drops down, although it might have a bit of forward momentum, but basically drops down. They deploy wings and glide. Glide means the bombs are slow when compared to missiles. And then they are INS or GPS guided bombs, which means they can only hit stationary targets. And have a good look at the GBU-39B's steel nose cone. There you go. Lots of people are tweeting that the GLSDB can hit moving targets. Yes, but only if you make the M26 rocket section with the Boeing GBU-39BB small laser diameter bomb, LSDB, which has a totally different nose cone because you have to attach a laser seeker to the bomb. Here is a photo of the GBU-39BB after being released from an AC-130J Ghost Rider. GBU-39BB are absolutely useless for Ukraine. They are laser-guided SDBs, meaning small diameter bombs, meaning there needs to be a plane or drone lasering the moving target, which means you have a Ukrainian aircraft flying at the ideal height for and within range of Russian air defense systems. So the idea that these are going to be able to hit, what he's saying is these aren't going to be the ones that are going to hit moving targets, because if they are the ones that are going to hit moving targets, then you need something up there guiding them, and that ain't going to happen. Forget all the tweets about moving targets and accuracy of 1 meter, because those specs are for the GBU-39BB, which Ukraine can't use. Likewise, there's no Home on Jam HOJ SDB version. HOJ SDB are still in development, so they're kind of homing ones. They would be used to autonomously strike jamming and radar systems, as does the AGM-88 HARM already given to Ukraine. So what they're saying is there is one in development that will seek out radiation and home in on that. Exactly what HARM missiles do, which is what you do in SEAD operations, suppression of enemy air defense, is you send out these rockets from planes, and these HARM rockets are sent towards like places where you think radar is being emitted, and then homes in on that and hits where the radar is being emitted, and that takes out radar stations, which means that they can't then use their air defense systems. And then you might send off some more rockets against the actual launchers, depending on how it's all set up. But that capability is not yet with these kind of glide bombs. And now to the GBU-53B, which has something different entirely. The GBU-53B, or Stormbreaker, or Small Diameter Bomb Increment 2, SDB2, is made by Raytheon and uses GPS INS guidance plus either a millimeter wave active radar homing or semi-active laser guidance or infrared homing seeker. It's a completely new weapon system. GBU 53Bs are also way more expensive than the GBU 39Bs. And as said before, they are manufactured by Raytheon, while the GBU 39B is made by Boeing, and the M26 rocket sections are made by Lockheed Martin, and the GLSDB was developed by Saab Boeing. What Ukraine will get are GPS INS guided GBU 39B on M26 rocket sections, which carry less explosive than GMLRS M31 rockets, and without the added punch of a supersonic Gimler's missile slamming into the target. What he's saying here is that these ordnances will have less impact than some of the Gimler's rockets that are sent up, which won't have as much range as this. But these guys still have, much better range, even if it's slightly less punch, as they also hit. Might be the explosives are smaller on board, and also it's not hitting as quickly. M31 Gimlers, 51 pounds. PBX 109, 39 GBU 39B have 36 pounds. AFX 757. Just smaller amounts of explosives. Last but not least, the GLSDB isn't even in production, so before they can show up in Ukraine, GLSDB has to enter production. Well, people are saying that they have been making them, and they are indeed on the front. This is coming from January. Remember, this is a little bit further back. This is without having heard that there are explosions in Mariupol, and is it GLSDB? M26 rocket sections exist, GBU 39B bombs exist, but the interstage connectors to make these two need to be built, and the resulting rockets have to be sent to Camden in Arkansas, where Lockheed Martin will mount them onto the pods, the HIMARS pods. Yes, the GLSDB is a great weapon and will help Ukraine, but it will take some time to arrive, and people need to stop mixing up the GBU 39B specs with the GBU 39BB and the GBU 53B specs. Last but not least, the GBU 30AB focus lethality munition is a GBU 39B variant with carbon fiber casing for ultra low fragmentation and a dime explosive for a more focused blast. Both are used to reduce collateral damage. Ukraine won't get it and doesn't need it. In other words, this is the type it will get, but it won't be there now, except he might be wrong there. So it could well be there now, because there was talk about this actually being made over the last months, not just waiting for it to be made. This was talked about in autumn last year, and they were saying, we could send these are something, but we need to make them. You could bet your bottom dollar the American administration would have gone, yeah, I'd suggest making those right now. You don't need to announce it, you don't need to tell anyone, just start making them. So I would imagine they've been made, and they've been made since then, and you're now starting to see them filter through onto the front lines, and this is what has been blowing up in Mariupol. I mean, it's either that or it's a Turkish MLRS that can go up to 150 kilometers, but you have heard from several sources, as I reported in this morning's news segment, that they are now admitting that they can hit things above 150 kilometers, and that is really significant. That's everything they've been if you're pro-Ukrainian watching this, and my regular listeners, viewers, and myself has been calling for ATACMS, long range ATACMS. It doesn't have to be ATACMS, but just something with longer range than 84 kilometers. Now it's there. The question is, how much of it is there, and how much damage can each one do? It would be interesting to see, to get some of the footage or some intelligence on what has actually been hit in Mariupol and how much damage has been done. I'm sure we'll see in a few days' time as that filters through. This idea of, so in the news segment this morning, I talked about how Jens Stoltenberg from NATO said, right, we're in an exhaustion phase of artillery ammunition. Like, NATO have used up all their shells getting them to Ukraine. They are ramping up manufacture. So the US is doing a phenomenal job. Australia is doing a job as well, I think, working with France. Other places in Europe are making. Bulgaria is making. The UK is warming up ammunition production, but whether that's built in the UK or just asking other people to do it and just giving them the money, I don't know. It is getting done, but the amount that they'll be producing at the moment will be less than what Ukraine is using on a daily basis. So there is going to be a lack of ammunition shells, or a reduction in ammunition shells for the Ukrainians to use. That could be a problem if they are considering doing their counteroffensives, as indeed it appears. But this isn't only a Ukrainian problem, and arguably it's more of a Russian problem. As I said this morning, Ukraine can rely on all of those allies of NATO, of all these other countries, including places like Pakistan, who are happily selling off their old ammunition stocks to Ukraine, or to allies who are then giving them to Ukraine. The world is getting together to send a bunch of stuff to Ukraine. Russia appear to be running out of stocks, and I'm just going to give you some more evidence on how they're running out of stocks. The stocks they have got left, a lot of it looks to be in very poor condition. There's news that they got 20,000 shells from Iran. Well, what do you do? 20,000 shells will last you one day, and that's operating at a third, maybe, of your peak usage as far as Russia's concerned. So, they are struggling, and if both are struggling, it's looking rosier for Ukraine going forward, with all of that ramping up of ammunition manufacture around the world. And the worry for the allies of Ukraine and for Ukraine is that Russia are screwed, but they do have one option, which is China. It could be that China can make stuff, give it to North Korea. North Korea could give their stuff to Russia, or however it's done. China is the only option for Ukraine, for Russia winning this war, or having a chance in this war. Without China, Russia are doomed. So Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says shell hunger, the basic causes and solutions to the problem, Rebar's analysis. We wrote about the problem of ammunition shortages in the Russian armed forces at the beginning of the year. So just for those pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin voices on the threads who say, a load of rubbish, not running out, blah, blah, blah. Like Rebar said there was a problem 2 months ago. And then they're saying, and it's still a problem. You've got Prigozhin from Wagner saying it's a problem. In fact, he's put out loads of pictures of dead Russian soldiers, say, look, this is what happens if you don't give us shells. So now the Russian army is starting to give them shells, but the Russian army are complaining they don't have shells. The Vostok Battalion, Igor Gherkin and others, I think, in the Millblogger community are mentioning this. And now Rebar, or not now Rebar, because they've been doing it for a couple of months. Since then, they say the situation hasn't changed fundamentally. The enemy, however, had a similar problem aggravated by the variety of ammunition supplied. NATO suppliers have not been able to fully compensate for AFU shortages, and in the West, they complain about the exhaustion of their own resources and demand to increase output. Yeah, absolutely. The causes are simple, says Rebar. The consumption of ammunition exceeds their industrial output in a given period of time. Well, yeah, and stocks in warehouses cannot compensate for the difference. Near Izium, 8,000 shells were fired just on one forest in a couple of days. Why so many? On the one hand, the skill of the gunners, but there is another cause. The usage figures did not contradict official documents. Don't really understand that. It doesn't make any sense to me, that last one. So let's go to Rebar's Telegram channel to see what they say, to continue that where they started there. And we are joining it down here. Each of its components determines the degree of ammunition shortage that the army will face during the fighting. Outdated regulations. Last spring and summer, the Russian armed forces spent a huge amount of ammunition every day by today's standards. So during the battles near Izium, this is talk about 8,000 shells were used. Why so many? And then that's a bit that didn't make sense. For clarity, you can take the rules of shooting and fire control, PSUO 96, with a list of the consumption rate to destroy and suppress different types of targets. And then the next one, battery of guns, 180 times 152 shells, 500 times 82 millimeter mortar rounds, 450 times medium caliber rockets per target. A detached unarmored target, 300 times 152 mil shells, 350 times 120 millimeter rounds. Enemy concentration area, 120 times 152 mil rounds, 200 times 120 mil mortar rounds, 300 times medium caliber rockets per hectare. In other words, if you want to take out these things, that's how many shells you need. So if you want to take out a battery of guns, you're going to use up about 180 152 mil shells to eventually get that battery of guns. It might be that you hit them after like walking them in. It might be that you miss with a load of them and get them on like the 5th time of trying, or they move or whatever. I would think that this is taking that all into account. So it's like that's a hell of a lot of shells. You think 180 shells to take out a battery of guns. And I don't know if that is 180 shells or 582 millimeter mortar shells or 450 medium caliber rockets per target. rather than all of those together per target. I don't know, but you can see the huge number of shells. That's why when you look at those videos that I show you in pictures, and I talk about pockmarked fields, and you just see all these holes all over, all these pockmarks all over the landscape, and you think you count all those up, and you think how many targets have been hit for all of those. Well, here you go: a battery of guns, 180, and 152 shells. Enemy concentration area. So if you just got a bunch of people, then you're going to be in an area. Then you're going to use 300 rockets per hectare. Just staggering numbers here, which means that you are going to need a lot of ammunition. Given this, it was difficult to convict someone for firing entire grad packets at a single ditch. Excessive expenditure was often ignored. After all, according to the regulatory document, this problem simply did not exist. So I guess they set up these kind of regulatory documents because they had so much ammunition. Traditionally, the doctrine is, well, we've got all this ammunition, we've been building it for like decades and decades, and manufacturing it for decades and decades and decades. Just fire it at stuff willy nilly, and you'll eventually take out that stuff. There you go. It's not a problem. So people can't. So what Rebar's saying is, you can't fire someone for using up ammunition too much, because actually it's part of the doctrine. And then the front factor. However, even changing the norms divorced from reality by itself would not solve the problem of shell starvation due to the high intensity of the conflict with an extended front line. So he says, when you've got that, and then you've got a huge front line, and you've got a really intense conflict, then you can multiply that by an absolute bucket load, and that is why we have got shell starvation. On the offensive, this is not possible. The troops going forward need to suppress the enemy and increase by several times their consumption of ammunition. In cities, units will spend even more shells because of the need to destroy positions in strong concrete houses. However, it will not be possible to solve all the problems using high precision projectiles. They are also running out, and replenishing stocks will take longer due to longer manufacturing. Therefore, in such conflicts, corrected projectiles still cannot completely replace the standard ones. And in fact, just to add to that, Russia don't really have very many guided munitions. They never have had. So I've talked long about how I think the percentage is something like, for the US, they use 10% dumb munitions and 90% guided, whereas the Russians have always used like 90% dumb munitions and 10% guided. And that's because they have so much dumb munitions, so they can just flatten places with it and don't really care. Whereas the Americans are much more concerned about collateral damage and about being really efficient. Use fewer shells and hit the target precisely. You're not going to then kill random people nearby or whatever, or you can have your troops operating fairly nearby because these are super accurate, so they're more efficient and more useful. Anyway, the last part of this, I mean, this is actually quite an interesting analysis by Rebar, I have to say. And the last one, if my fingers can work, which they appear not to be. Depots, large but not bottomless. The shortage can be compensated with reserves accumulated before the war, but they will end sooner or later. This is clearly seen in the special military operation, where in a year, even Soviet reserves were pretty empty on both sides. Whatever the storage capacities are, they allow only for a while to prevent interruptions in supplies to the units on the front line. And the main way to overcome the shortage is still the mass industrial production of ammunition, the recipe for combating shell hunger in order of decreasing effectiveness. So, 1, increasing the output of ammunition by expanding production and increasing production efficiency. 2, accumulating reserves in the rear in an uninterrupted supply of troops. 3, rational use and rejection of outdated norms of projectile consumption. 4, expansion of production and reasonable use of high precision weapons. So all of those things need to happen. Now, when you have like the accumulating the reserves part for uninterrupted supply, when you got HIMARS hitting those depots, that affects the shell usage. When you've got sanctions, that affects the shell manufacture. When you've got doctrine and sanctions, that affects the precision ammunition manufacture. And changing the doctrine is something that that might well take time. The above is universal and relevant not only for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but also any other states involved in conflicts of similar intensity. Yes and no, because actually not all other armies, for example, as I said, the American army will use much more precision armaments. They will need less of it, but you're still going to run out of those if you're in intense conflict, right? But there you go. And the side that will be the first to take all measures will decisively reduce the shell hunger and get a chance to take the initiative in the war. And this is where I think the initiative will switch to the Ukrainians, because they've got a better chance of being able to deal with all those issues, given that they have the might of all of their allies combined against Russia here. So hopefully that was useful. Oof. Right, let's go on to look at this little bit of video footage to show, and I've shown you a couple of videos of helicopters flying low, and the reason they fly low is to get to evade radar detection, and they often fly low along roads because it's easy to see wires and stuff going across, and often they don't have wires going across, and you can be confused for being a big truck or something, or so on and so forth. Anyway, this is very low indeed. So this helicopter just over the top of someone's van here. And then as it goes over, I mean, that's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Look how low it is to the road. That's insane. The tires are that is a car's height away from the road. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So yeah, there's various footage of Ukrainian helicopters doing that for good reason. I love this. Right, this is and any German people watching this, I'd be interested. So this, in your views on such rallies as this, I haven't seen this in the news. I've just seen this, but let me know what you think about these rallies. Are they happening? What's the sentiment, pro-Russian sentiment, like in Germany? But this is a rally in Germany, a pro-Russian rally. And in fact, let's translate this. So, on a march in support of Russia and Germany, someone put speakers out the window with circus music. I absolutely love this. Brilliant. Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. Just a bit of, nothing like making something seem ridiculous to really pulling the rug out from under people's vehement political and ideological beliefs and chants and protestations. Very good. Okay, final thing, I think, before I'm going to leave the rest till later to do another video. In fact, I'll leave that till later. I'll do this one first. So, for thee, not me. Below each of these smiling faces of Russia's leadership are the names and ages of their sons. So let's have a look at this. Name and ages of their sons. So these are all the people sitting in kind of the front rows of Putin's speech the other day. And all these super important people, all hugely in support of Putin and the war. And names their children and their ages, their sons and their ages. How many of those are in the Russian army? How many of those have been mobilized? How many of those are fighting in Ukraine at the moment? Let's have a look. Oh, none of them. Literally none of them. None of these people's sons are fighting in Ukraine. That's really convenient. So you don't really believe it enough to allow your son to go there. I wonder what that tells you. Obviously, self-preservation. You don't want them to be risked, but you're happy to risk other people, right? And you're happy to support Putin risking other people. Okay. So yeah, there you go. That is the end of part 1 of today's Ukraine War Update Extra. Thanks again for all your massive support and well wishing. I was pretty devastated the other day being banned. I'm over it now. I'm angry, but I'll get back over to ATB geopolitics, and all will be well, no doubt. Anyway, thanks again. Take care. Speak soon.